If you have your Bibles or your phones or your iPads or whatever device you may have, if you're screening this from your television, turn with me to the book of Luke. Luke 22. Luke 22. And we're going to look at just 4 verses right now. Luke 22, verses 24 through 27. Luke 22, verses 24 through 27. All right, verse 24 reads as follows. It says, "And there was also a strife among them, which of them should be accounted the greatest. And he said unto them, The kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and they that exercise authority upon them all, or upon them, are called benefactors. But ye shall not be so. But he that is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he that is chief as he that doeth serve. For whether is greater he that sitteth at meat, or he that serveth, is not he that sitteth at meat. But I am among you as he that serveth." Amen. If you're taking notes on today, I am coming from the topic, who's the greatest? Who's the greatest? Grace Center, right now, there's what you want to call it, one of the wonders of the world called Mount Rushmore. On Mount Rushmore, you have Thomas and Jefferson, George Washington, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln on Mount Rushmore. Now, a lot of times when people get into debates about different things, they will say, well, who is your Mount Rushmore of this, of soccer, of football, of basketball, of baseball? Who is your Mount Rushmore? In other words, what they're saying is, who are your top 4 greatest in this particular sport or profession? Who's your Mount Rushmore? Now, if we're talking basketball, let me give you my Mount Rushmore. Okay, my Mount Rushmore of basketball, it would be Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Bill Russell, and Kobe Bryant. That's my Mount Rushmore of basketball. Now, there's a debate about that, of course. You really don't get a debate about Michael and Magic. For the most part, those two is in everyone's Mount Rushmore. They're in everyone's top 2, top 3, top 4 basketball players of all time, Magic and Michael. So it's not a debate about those two, really. So setting those two aside, when you look at the other 2 that you may want to place in your Mount Rushmore, that's when the debate comes into play. Because most, they may switch out my Bill Russell for Kareem. I won't argue with that. Kareem is definitely one of the greatest. I think he's like still the top scoring player of all time. So you really can't debate with Kareem. I give you that. Now, some may want to switch out my Kobe for LeBron. Well, LeBron just got another ring last season. Kind of hard to debate with that as well. But it's just my opinion about who is in my Mount Rushmore. I have Michael, I have Magic, I have Russell, and I have Kobe. That's my Mount Rushmore. You may have your own Mount Rushmore. And just for fun's sake, I know we're having church and we're talking about Jesus, we're talking about God and all of that. But just for fun's sake, if you have a Mount Rushmore, can you comment that in the comment section? Inquiring minds would like to know. But that's my Mount Rushmore. Michael, Magic, Russell, and Kobe. My Mount Rushmore of basketball. And so, as you can see, debates about that have been going on for a long time about who is the greatest. Even when you look at other sports, you're talking about, okay, who is the greatest quarterback of all time? Now, for a long time, it has been Joe Montana. But now you have to kind of bring Tom Brady in there. I know we have some Brady haters. I get it. I'm not a big Tom Brady fan myself. I totally get it. But the man has a lot of Super Bowl rings. I mean, my goodness, he's a great football player. And, so some may debate, is it Tom Brady? Is it Joe Montana? Is it Dan Marino? Is it Brett Favre? Is it, Aaron Rodgers? Is it Peyton Manning? The list goes on and on and on about who's the greatest quarterback of all time. Some may talk about, well, who is the greatest running back of all time? I told you last week that I love Barry Sanders. I believe that Barry Sanders is the greatest running back of all time. Now, some may say Emmitt Smith. Some may say, my goodness, Jim Brown. That's up for debate as well about who is the greatest running back of all time. I think it is Barry Sanders. That's my opinion about that. But as I said last week, that's just my opinion. Now, you may say, well, who is the greatest wide receiver of all time? Some may say it's Jerry Rice. Some may say it's Randy Moss. I have to go with Jerry Rice on this. I'm a big Randy Moss fan, but I have to go with my man Jerry on this one. And even that's up for debate as well. So as you can see, Grace Center, debates about who's the greatest of sports, of professions, of different things, it has been happening for a long time. Okay. But although we may have debates today about who's the greatest in a certain sport or who's the greatest in a certain profession, when you look at it in biblical days, there was also discussions about who's the greatest. To set the atmosphere of the text and bring you up to speed, let's talk about how the debate about who should be the greatest of the disciples even started. Here in the text, Grace Center, Jesus had just finished having his Last Supper with his disciples. The Last Supper, of course, is the last earthly dinner or the last earthly meal that Jesus had with his disciples. He told his disciples how he would go to the cross, what was going to take place, and all of that. Okay, he just had his last earthly meal with his disciples. After all of that took place, his disciples, they began to argue. They began to dispute. They began to have a disagreement. They began to have a discussion about who would be the greatest. Who would be number one? Who would be numero uno? Now, according to the Gospel of Luke, this takes place, as I mentioned, after the Last Supper, after communion, after the breaking of the bread, after the cup of blessing. This is after a time when Jesus had just finished telling them that, his body, when they take up communion, the bread that they eat would represent his body, and the wine that they drink would represent his blood. It will be a symbol of him going to the cross and him dying for their sins. Okay, after all of that took place is when they decide to have a dispute over who would be the greatest. Now, these are supposed to be his followers, okay? These are his disciples. But at the same time, these are future leaders. Now, the text, it does not name which of the disciples had this disagreement, had this dispute, had this argument. It doesn't really name the disciples. But it does say there was a discussion among them, which tells us that most likely all of them, they took place at some time in this discussion about who should be the greatest. And the sad thing about this great sin is that this took place, according to the Gospel of Luke, after the Last Supper. In other words, it's getting close for Jesus to die. Jesus dying on the cross and him being raised from the grave is what Christianity is, what we hang our hat on. Okay? Is what we truly believe in. Is Jesus going to the cross and him dying for our sins. Okay? That's what Christianity is truly about. But these disciples were only thinking about themselves after the Last Supper. They're on the cusp of history. They're on the cusp of an event that's going to take place, that's going to change the history of the world, and they want to have an argument, a discussion, a dispute over who's the greatest. Can you imagine if they had social media during those times? Can you imagine if one of them got caught on camera saying the things and doing some of the things that they were doing at that particular time? But I will say this, Grace Center, we are at a slight advantage. We have a different vantage point because we can play Monday morning quarterback and judge the disciples by what we read here in the text. So we have a slight advantage on what is taking place. But even after saying that, they did have Jesus in their midst. They had God manifested in the flesh right in front of them. And by this time, they knew who he was. And at least they could have been on their best behavior. But no, they still wanted to have an argument over who would be the greatest disciple. This reminds me of a scene in Coming to America. It's the barbershop scene. You know the scene I'm talking about, where they have this argument over who's the greatest boxer of all time. Is it Rocky Marciano? Is it this person? Is it Muhammad Ali? And You know, they had this funny scene in Coming to America about the greatest boxer. In my opinion, the greatest boxer is Ali. The greatest. The GOAT. The greatest of all time. As a matter of fact, when we're just strictly talking about the greatest athlete in sports in its entirety, I'm going with Ali myself. I'm going with Michael Jordan as a close second, but it was a discussion even in the movie about who would be the greatest, or who is the greatest boxer of all time. So you can see, Grace Center, that having disputes, it has been going on for a very long time. And let me say this here, because this is also important. It is nothing wrong with striving to be great. It's absolutely nothing wrong with you striving to be great, whether it's in your career, your sport, your different profession. Because that's not what the text is talking about, as far as when I'm talking about them having this dispute about who is the greatest. It's nothing wrong with you striving to be great at what you do. As a matter of fact, you should strive to be number one in your respective fields. Okay? As a matter of fact, the Bible even talks about that even when you work unto the Lord. So you're striving to please God when you perform your work. So it's nothing wrong with working and striving to be great at what you do. But what the text here is talking about, Grace Center, is talking about the disciples wanted to know who would have the most prestige in the kingdom. Okay, that's what the text is talking about. Who would have the most prestige in the kingdom? Who would be placed on a pedestal? Okay, who would be the one that everyone looks up to? That was the mentality of the disciples when they had the argument about who would be the greatest. And I love the response of Jesus regarding what's taking place here. Let's look at it. Verse 25, he says, "And he said unto them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and they that exercise authority upon them are called benefactors." Okay, benefactors. You see, in those days, Jews, when they looked at Gentiles, they looked at Gentiles as being worldly. Okay, Gentiles were considered the outcast, considered unclean. They did not want to have anything to do with the Gentiles. They treated Gentiles just like they were dogs. Okay, they considered them unclean, unworthy. They were saying they fell outside of the household of Israel. Okay, that's how they considered Gentiles. Gentiles were also seen as pagans who did not know the true and living God. All right, so the Jews looked down upon the Gentiles. And then Jesus said that the Gentiles, he said that the Gentiles, when they are being looked down upon, and when they have other people rule over them, the people that rule over them are called benefactors. Okay, the ones that exercise authority over them, they're called benefactors. Now, a benefactor is someone that should be honored. It was someone that had done great things for the service of their country. It means a helper. But watch this. But yet the Gentiles had these people who were called benefactors rule over them. Stick with me. Okay. The Gentiles had benefactors exercise authority over them. Okay, but watch this. In verse 26, Jesus said that this is not the way that it should be. The people who are ruling over the Gentiles are being called benefactors, and that's not the way it should be. They are not helping them by ruling over them. They are not helping them by exercising authority over them. You see, from time to time, Grace Center, Jesus would confront the culture. Jesus would confront tradition from time to time. And when he would confront the culture and confront tradition, he'll come out and say, you're wrong. It shouldn't be like this. You should not have these people having rule over you. You should not have these individuals exercising authority over you. Jesus would confront the culture. He would confront tradition and say, this is wrong. This is not the way it should be. See, that's another reason why they wanted to kill Jesus. Because Jesus would step in and Jesus would call things the way it was. If it was wrong, it was wrong. If it was not right, he would correct it. And being that he was correcting the culture at that time, that's another reason why they wanted to kill Jesus. Jesus is telling them that they should not think like the culture is thinking. Oh, I'm about to get in trouble now. Jesus confronted them and said, that's the culture. That's the culture that you're living in right now. But that's not the way it should be. You see, right now, Grace Center, we're living in this culture where they're trying to push out Jesus. They're trying to push out godly things. Okay, things that as Christians, as believers, that we believe in. They're trying to push it aside. They're trying to take it out of the schools, take it out of this place, take it out of the workplace. And they're trying to push in their own agendas. Okay, so that when they push in their agendas, the culture will assimilate. It will come into agreement with each other. So sometimes if we are believers, if we are followers of Jesus, disciples of Jesus, we have to do like Jesus did and confront the culture. Confront what's wrong. Jesus said, nope, I understand the culture as far as them exercising authority over you. I understand about them having rule over you and you calling them benefactors. But that's not the way it should be. It should not be going down like that. Let's look at verse 26. Let's read verse 26. He says, but ye shall not be so. You see that? But ye shall not be so. But he that is greatest among you, let him be as the younger. Let's stop right there for a second. The greatest among you, let him be as the younger. In other words, Jesus flips the script. Because you would think that he would say, let the oldest among you be the greatest. But he doesn't say that. He says, why not let the youngest among you be the greatest? It was a way that Jesus was teaching them not to be like the world. It was a teachable moment. Jesus always had teachable moments. He was always teaching his disciples. But let's finish reading verse 26. And at the end of that he says, he that is chief as he that doeth serve. Okay, serve. Okay, that word serve, sometimes we look at that word serve as a dirty word sometimes. Okay, serve. Okay, he said the chief, the leader that is among you will be the one who serves. One thing I learned by being in the military, it was always interesting to me, is that when we would go out to the field and so forth, and we would line up to eat, it was interesting that the lower enlisted soldiers would always eat first. The higher enlisted soldiers, the sergeants, the sergeant majors, first sergeants, and so on, the captains, lieutenants, they always ate last. They always made sure that they fed the lower enlisted soldiers first. And the higher enlisted soldiers, they ate last. And it took a long time for me to understand that as far as what they were doing. They took a back seat to the lower enlisted soldiers. They made sure that they fed the lower enlisted soldiers first. They took care of the lower enlisted soldiers and they thought about themselves last. Even here in this text, Jesus says, let the younger be the greatest. Not the older, the younger. Jesus flips the script on what's taking place in the culture. Okay? But let's look at the last verse here. Last verse, verse 27. It says, for whether is greater, he that sitteth at meat, or he that serveth, is not he that sitteth at meat? Okay? Let's stop right there for a second. He asked them a question, but he really wasn't expecting them to answer back. It's a rhetorical question. Okay? And he asked them, who is greater? Is it the one that is sitting at the table being served, or the one who is serving? Let me say that again. Who's the greatest? Is it the one that's sitting down that's the greatest, or is it the one that's actually doing the serving? You see, the worldly answer would be the one who is sitting at the table, who is being served. Because if you see someone being served, it appears that they have the power. It appears that they have control. But then Jesus says something that causes us to scratch our heads and rethink our view on serving. Let's finish reading verse 27. The last part of that, it says, but I am among you as he that serveth. Okay, let me say that again. But I am among you as he that serveth. Jesus gave them a rhetorical question, and then he turns around and gave them the answer to the question. It's a pop quiz that they could not fail. It's like having an open book test. He's saying that the world will have their master sit at the table, and they'll have people come to them and serve them. But that's not the way it should work in the kingdom. That's not the way it should work in my kingdom. That is not how we operate. That is not how we get down. You're not great because someone brings something to you. Okay? You're not great because someone answers your every call. You're not great because you can snap a finger and people will trip over themselves just to get to you. That's not how you should operate. Now you have to remember that he's talking to his disciples. He's teaching them because this is a teachable moment. Because they just had the Last Supper. He talked about him being betrayed. And they began to argue over who would be the greatest. And then Jesus is saying, let me fix this right now. Let me nip this in the bud right now. He tells them that if you want to be the greatest, what you really have to do is serve. That's what he's saying. He said, if you really want to be the greatest, serve. That's how you can be the greatest, is that you have to serve. Not think about yourself all the time, but serve. Not place yourself in front of the line all of the time, but serve. Not always trying to get in the front seat, but get in the back seat and serve. That's how you can be the greatest. Not looking out for yourself. Not having selfish motives. Not having this agenda about what's in it for me. What can I get out of this for me? Jesus said, if you want to be the greatest, serve. If you want to be the greatest, stop thinking about yourself and you just might be the greatest. He flips the script on everything that was happening at the time. As far as the benefactors having rule over them, he was confronting the culture. He was confronting the thinking of his disciples. And a lot of times, God will will come against us, confront us and say, hey, this is not the way you should think. If you want to be great, serve. If you want to be great, stop thinking about yourself and think about someone else. Because it's not always about you. It's about someone else. You have to serve. We don't serve to please man. We serve to please God. Oh, that's a good little tweet right there. Watch. Let me say that one more time. We don't serve to please man. We serve to please God. We must learn to develop the heart of a servant. Serving others, Grace Center, is not demeaning. It's not demeaning to serve others. Serving others does not place you at the bottom, but yet it places you at the top. Oh, that was so nice. Let me say that twice. Serving others does not place you at the bottom, but yet it places you at the top. Jesus said that the greatest among you are the ones who serve. We have to be givers instead of takers. And even in this world that we live in, it sometimes seems like we have more takers than givers. We have to be givers and not takers all of the time. We have to look to see what can we do for someone else. What's in it for someone else and not what's always in it for me. Instead of trying to take away from it, we need to try to figure out how can we give to it. What can we do for others? How can we serve others? How can we benefit others? How can we bless others? Not always, how can I get the blessing? The blessing of Abraham is upon me. The blessing of no, but how can I be a blessing to others? How can I benefit you? What can I do for you? How can I serve you? It's about others, Grace Center. And we have to learn to take ourselves out of the picture a lot of times and serve others. If you want to be great, serve. That's how you can be great. I'm closing now. Watch this. Now this is Jesus talking. This is Jesus. God manifested in the flesh. And he told them that if you want to be the greatest, serve. And he can say that because he can back it up. The purpose of Jesus coming here was so that he would come and he would die on the cross for our sins. He came to serve. That's why Jesus is the real MVP. That's why he's the superstar of the Bible. That's why he's the main headliner of the Bible. Jesus came to seek and to save those who were lost. He came to serve. That's why he's the greatest. I know there's other religions out there. Jesus is the greatest. Jesus is the greatest. He came to serve. Not thinking about himself. He could have stayed in heaven, where it was full of glory, full of splendor. But yet he decided to leave the throne and to come to earth and to get things back in order. But yet when he came to serve. As a matter of fact, when he came here, the red carpet was not rolled out for him. Okay. When he was born in a manger around nasty, smelly, filthy, dirty animals. That's the way he came. He could have came here on a chariot. He could have came and said, you know what, I don't want to stay in no manger. I don't want to be born around this smelly stalk. Place me up in the penthouse of the penthouses. Place me in a nice tent. But yet, he came lowly and humble. He came to serve. If we are to be disciples of Jesus, followers of Jesus, we must have a servant's heart. We must have the heart of Jesus. We must figure out what can we do for someone else. How can I be a blessing to you today? And don't expect anything in return. Don't expect to get something out of it, but yet see how can I bless you today? What can I do for you today? What do you need instead of what you can do for me? What's that phrase? So I think it was John F. Kennedy. Not what your country can do for you, but what can you do for your country? I think that's the way it goes. But what can you do? How can you serve others? How can you serve your family, your neighbors, your co-workers, the church you're a part of? What can you do? How can you be a blessing? Because if you could figure out how to place yourself at the back, you're really pushing yourself to the front. And when you're pushing yourself to the front without you trying to push yourself to the front, that's how you can be the greatest. Jesus is the greatest. He came to seek and to save those who were lost. He came for you. He came for I. He's the greatest. If we are to follow his example, follow his blueprint, follow his pattern about how he did it, that's how we can be great in the kingdom of God.